Oh, that wasn't breathy. I thought it was breathy, but
No,
Monica's
I'm-
here. We gotta get Monica on here.
It could be my next job, right?
Exactly. Well, welcome everybody to another podcast. This is our Sunday podcast. Tonight, we have Alex in the hot seat. Alex, you're from California, right?
That's right.
Making sure. All right. And then tonight, we have actually 3 awesome hosts co-hosting with me. We have Terry, like always. She does a great job. We have Monica, does an awesome job too. And our special guest tonight, Christina Peterson from California also.
Yay!
I think you're both from San Diego, aren't you, Alex?
No,
and
I
Christine?
think we're just maybe 15 minutes or 30 minutes away from each other.
So you
There
guys
we go.
should have just gotten together at the same house. And
I know.
We should have.
We should have.
well, we're not thinking. So, oh, well.
I'm also in California right now, but totally a different part. I'm in the middle of nowhere. So,
Awesome.
Yeah. That's
Well,
sometimes a
good.
good place to be.
That
Right?
is.
Bishop. I'm in Bishop.
There you go.
Oh, Bishop, I know where that's at. It's a good area, but be careful. I heard there was an earthquake and there's some droughts and dry weather, and it's like 115 degrees there.
Yeah, exactly. There was 5.9 earthquake. I was like, oh this is the first time I've felt an earthquake like this. That was kind of cool. I thought it was totally me at first. I was like,
Yeah.
am I just really dizzy? And then I was like, I feel like my chair is moving. And
Oh,
I was like,
yeah.
the house is moving. I was like, why is the house moving? It took me a while to catch on that it was an earthquake.
Yeah, that was a rolling earthquake. My mom lives in Visalia, just south of Bishop. And so she was telling me today on my Sunday call to my mom, and she's like, yeah, it was a rolling earthquake. And so I know what those feel like, because I was in a store when they happened, and like things were swaying like a boat.
It feels like you're on a boat. Yep.
And then I was like swaying, and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel real nauseous right now. I don't know why. And I didn't realize it was an earthquake. And then after it was over, I was like, oh, I feel funny. Maybe I'm getting a hot flash.
Yeah, it was much like you're on a boat. That's exactly how it feels. So, but it was long too.
Wow.
It needed to be so I could catch on to the fact that it was an earthquake, right? I was very slow that day, apparently.
Like this
Like
is
something weird's
happening
happening to my body.
right now.
Exactly.
Well, when you get older, you're like, is this a health related issue I'm having right now?
Right?
Part
Could
of
be
my
anything.
age.
So, but anyway, welcome tonight to a very special podcast we have tonight. We're going to discuss some interesting topics, but first of all, we want to get to know Alex. And anybody out there who is new to the podcast, who's coming on for the first time, please like us on our Facebook page so you get notifications of these podcasts. Sometimes we do special ones, and then you want to be notified. And then we also have a YouTube channel where you can go to our YouTube channel and also subscribe and hit the little bell. And then you'll get notified when these podcasts that you've missed have been uploaded, and you can go back and watch them. We don't edit our videos, so all the goofiness that we have here, we're doing, it's all going to be on the recording. So we just put the whole thing raw on there for you to enjoy. And so go ahead and like us on both those platforms, and then you'll be able to see past episodes and any future ones you might miss. Okay. Let's see. So we're going to get to know Alex a little bit. So Alex, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, how long have you been a member of the church? Have you been a lifelong member?
I have not been a long time member. By the way, is this the part where I put on my hat?
Oh, there it is. Okay.
I won't stay on. I got my earphones on. Yeah, I'm a California native. I was born and raised in the San Gabriel Valley, which is the other valley. Everybody's sort of familiar with the San Fernando Valley. I was
Yep.
in the other valley, in the San Gabriel Valley. So that's where I grew up. And yeah, I actually joined the church when I was in high school. Missionaries came to my house, and they knocked on our door, and we went through the lessons and went through several pairs of missionaries. I joined with my entire family. I was the first one actually to go through the lessons.
Really?
Yeah. They asked me if I wanted to be baptized. They gave me the baptism challenge, and I said, you know what? What about if my whole family listened to these discussions? And so I had my parents and my sister join in on on the lessons. And so we went through the whole discussions again, a couple of movies, one night they brought over a 16 millimeter projector and they showed us the first vision. That's probably when I realized that there was something special about this religion, this church, this thing that they were talking about.
Was that the projector, and then you had a cassette tape that you played to go along with it? It would beep when you had to change the.
No,
the
not the film strip projector, the actual
okay.
movie projector.
There you go. That's nice.
Although I used to use the film strips on my mission.
Did you?
Yes, I did.
And it beeps.
And it beeps. Yes.
Yeah.
That was fun.
That was. It was basically for you kids out there. That was a first iteration of PowerPoint.
Absolutely. Yes. So yeah, and then so we went through the discussions. They challenged us again to be baptized. We all joined the church. I think I was about 17 at the time. And a couple of years after that, I put my papers in and I was called to serve a mission in Japan Sapporo.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So for those of you who are not familiar with Japan, Sapporo is in Hokkaido, the island of Hokkaido. Hokkaido is the northernmost island of Japan. There's actually a Russian island just to the north of Hokkaido. And it's very cold, very, very cold. Lots of snow. In fact, when I got there, it was December. And my first experience with actual snow, because I was a Southern California native, and for us, snow means you go to the mountains, you drive for an hour and you go up to the mountains and you play around in the snow. You put some snow on the car as you drive down to see how long it takes to melt. And that was it, right? But going to Japan was totally different. And in fact, Utah was different for me because it started snowing in Utah before I left, when I was at the Mission Training Center. But it was just light snow. It wasn't really that bad. But then I got to Japan, Hokkaido. That was major snow. Let me tell you a story. So I arrived in the mission home in Sapporo, and the night before we were transferred out, we had a meeting, and there was a big, huge wall map of the island and all of the different places where missionaries were stationed. And so there was this one point at the very top of the map, the very tippy top of the map, which is the very farthest northern point of Japan, this little town called Wakkanai. And we were all looking at each other, all the missionaries, and we were saying, wow, I wonder what kind of guy is going to get sent up to that little point up there, we're laughing, And so they make the announcements, they announce all the assignments, and they called my name and they said, Elder, you're going to Wakkanai.
Like, you are the winner.
I'm the winner. Yay.
Good one.
Yeah. So me and another elder got to ride the train for hours and hours and got sent up to Wakkanai. It was absolutely freezing cold. And for some reason I don't know why, I didn't take out my snow boots. I was wearing my missionary shoes. And so when we got off the train, we got off the train, we got onto the street, and we were walking towards the apartment, and I started slipping because I'm wearing these regular missionary shoes, and I couldn't walk without slipping and falling. So what the elders had to do is, they grabbed me by the arm, one on each side, and I slid all the way to the apartment.
Oh, that's hilarious. They just drag you along by your arms.
They just dragged me along with my arms. And
Don't move your feet. We'll get you there.
That's it. I just slid along all the way to the apartment.
So what year were you in the MTC?
1980.
Ooh, nice.
Wow.
Yeah. Actually, President Joe J. Christensen was Joe J or Joe C. Joe J. Christensen. Christensen was my mission president, or at the MPC. He passed away recently, but he was a great guy. Yeah.
So you were in Japan and you did a 2-year mission there, and
Yep.
then you came back to California. Did you
Yep.
go to anywhere else? How big was the mission of Japan? Was it the whole country or was it broken up?
Just the whole island, just the island. And so I actually served along from the top of the island on this sort of band going down the middle all the way to the bottom of the island.
Very nice.
Yep. It was,
And so did you already know Japanese or did you have to learn Japanese?
I had to learn Japanese. Yeah, it's a typical story. You know, you go to the MTC, you learn this foreign language, and then you get to the country and you're thinking, I learned the wrong language. This is not the language I learned.
Are there different types of Japanese?
There are actually. And if different parts of Japan speak different dialect of Japanese. And so you have to get used to that type of Japanese wherever you serve. And so in Hokkaido, they have the fishermen on the coasts, and their Japanese is very different. It's a sort of rough, coarse Japanese, and so it takes some getting used to.
It's like anywhere, right? Where
Yeah.
like in the US, there are some states where you just drive to a different part. I mean, Utah's like that even, right? You just drive to a different part of the state and all of a sudden it's a different dialect. And if you're not a native English speaker, it can take a while to get used to what people are saying.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, I always imagine foreigners that come to the United States and they're like, oh man, I'm in California and I totally understand everybody. And then they go to South Carolina and they're like, what? I can't understand a word they're saying.
Yep.
So what was your favorite food that you had while on your mission?
Everything Japanese, all the Japanese food. I love it. I learned to experience and enjoy all the different kinds of things that they had. The raw fish, the yakisoba, curry. There's lots of really good stuff. There's only a couple of Japanese foods that I won't eat, that I've never got used to. And one of them is natto. I don't know if you're familiar with natto. It's a fermented bean. And you use chopsticks. It's a fermented soybean.
Oh, okay.
And it usually comes in a little styrofoam square package. And you open it up and you dip your chopsticks into it. And there's this sort of like slimy, you pick up the stuff and there's these strands of slimy stuff sort of that, come along with it. And you sort of do this loopy thing to, get the strands out.
You want to make sure you get all of that slime.
Get all of that slimy
Get it all.
stuff. Yeah. I never got used to the smell and the taste of that. So no thanks.
It's like Vegemite in like Australia.
Oh yeah.
It sounds like Ryan Harper has some experience in Japan as
I
well
think
from the
Ryan's
chat.
And
He was asking if, based on your last name, if people thought you were native on your mission, like if they assumed you were native.
Yeah. So I'm not Japanese, and I'll address that later. But when I was in Japan on my mission, there were times when, especially when I was there was one time I was with a Japanese companion. And his features on his face were not 100% Japanese. He was 100% Japanese, but he had sort of a foreign look. And so it was funny because we would go to teach investigators and they would look at me to ask questions and, to talk, to have a conversation, and they would ignore him because he looked foreign and I looked more Japanese than he did.
and you're not Japanese.
And I'm not Japanese, but I sort of looked at and have that Japanese look.
So what are you then?
Both of my parents are actually from Mexico. So
Really?
I'm Hispanic.
Oh,
That's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, that there is a similar features in some of the natives of Mexico. So
There are, yeah.
So I can see that. And so your Takahashi, that comes from where?
That's actually my wife's name, last name.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
wow.
Yeah,
I
okay.
took her name.
awesome.
Oh,
So what was your maiden name?
My maiden name.
your maiden name.
Yeah, it was Gonzalez.
Gonzalez. Awesome.
Yes.
That's to
That's pretty
Takahashi.
cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool that you took her name. I mean, some people might not think that's cool. I think that's cool.
I think so too. I agree. More
Really,
I
is
like
there
it.
is there a story behind that, or like
right.
Yeah. It's a long story, but the short version is that it was a present to her parents.
Oh,
Her parents had 2 daughters, no sons, and it was just a way to sort of perpetuate the line, the name.
Oh, that's cool.
So my children all have that last name.
That's
And
really neat.
yeah, after the divorce, I thought about changing back, but I wanted to keep that connection with my kids intact, so I kept the name.
That's
That is
How
awesome.
many kids do you have?
I have 4.
Boys? Just-
I have 3 girls, and the youngest is a boy. They're all adults and doing their own stuff.
their own
Nice.
thing.
That's cool.
Yep. I have 2
But-
grandkids.
So did you speak
Oh.
Spanish then?
I'm sorry?
You speak a little Spanish?
I grew up speaking Spanish. Yes.
Oh, good.
So now you're trilingual. You speak
Yes.
Nihongo and Spanish and English.
Nihongo, Español, and
Español
English.
and English. Yes.
Mm.
That's awesome. Did you also teach like your heritage language to your kids?
Unfortunately, no. There was this thing where my wife at the time wanted to make sure that she was immersed in English.
Mm,
So no, we didn't really teach our kids Japanese
or Spanish?
nor Spanish.
Yeah.
They funny thing though is that they studied in school.
Cool.
They took both Spanish and Japanese.
Oh, wow.
That's
pretty cool.
awesome.
Yeah, I think Christina told me she speaks 3 languages too, right?
Me?
You
I'm
speak
trying.
Tagalog?
I'm trying the third. I'm still trying on the third. So I speak Tagalog, I speak English, and then I'm still trying to learn Spanish.
Well, if you learn Spanish, that'll be 4 because you told me you spoke Tagalog, Filipina, and English.
So Tagalog and Tagalog and Filipino is one. But but it depends. I get what you mean, Corey.
Well, I worked in the Philippines
Right.
like for like 2 90-day tours, so it's like an inside Filipino joke.
I don't know if I've seen Christina laugh that hard on one of these
Well, because-
podcasts. That was pretty great.
Because
Inside joke.
it was funny because he can speak the, what do you call that, the Tagalog in the Philippines very well, and like English, how do you describe it, Corey? Like the English version of, oh no, the Tagalog version of English. It's
Yeah,
just
so
the
it's-
accent. You play with
it's-
the accent so people can
Yeah.
understand you better.
Yeah. So when
so-
I was there, my partner was a Filipino American. And when I first got there, he started speaking with a heavy Filipino accent.
Yep.
And I kind of looked at him like, hey, dude, like, and then I was like, well, he's not being offensive because he is Filipino. Like, if I did it, it'd be offensive.
Yeah.
And then he's like, no, dude, they don't understand a word you're saying, Corey. Like, what do you mean they don't understand me? He goes, they don't understand your accent. Their ear is tuned to the way the Filipinos talk. So you
Yes.
need to speak like the Filipinos.
Right.
So, and then the Filipinos would always tell, like when I tried it and I started getting used to it, the Filipinos would say, oh, you speak good Filipino. They never said Tagalog. They'd said, you
Yeah,
speak
it's
good
Filipino. Yeah.
And so that's why I was joking with Christina, because she could switch it to like, to Filipina and you can kind of
That's
hear it.
right. That's right. So every time I go visit the Philippines, I would switch my accent to the Tagalog Filipino accent, which is very different when like how I speak here. So in order for for me to be understood what I say, especially like when I go to the store or the bank, I will have to switch to that particular accent so I could be understood better. So right now I'm speaking with maybe the American accent, so it caters to the demographics. But if I'm there, I'd probably be speaking like, can everyone understand me really, really well? So everyone can. So it's just a twang of the accent. So, but it's really a switch in the brain when we do that. When I do that.
That's so cool though, because there are so many places in the world like that where, I mean, even if you think of places like India or some parts of Africa where kids grow up speaking English, but they speak it within a very particular dialect. And so they'll be like, no, I'm a native English speaker, but they have this accent, right? That's particular to where they live. That's cool.
Yeah. And my son knows when I have an 11-year-old. So when I'm pretty serious, when I ask him to do something and then mom switches to this accent, he knows I'm serious.
That's so funny.
He's like, uh-oh, mom's going native.
Exactly.
That's like for me when I just say my son's full name. That's the clue that he's like, uh-oh.
Yeah. and my son's name is Hiro, so it's Japanese. But I'm not Japanese. We just like Japanese names. And so to say that in Tagalog is really no different. So it's either Hiro or Hero, it's just the tone and the accent of mom. So
that's awesome.
So then what if my parents just called me teriyaki to be funny? What would that put me as?
Sweet and salty is what it is.
Just like Terry, right?
Yeah, that's so true.
So Alex, what's
Yes.
the best part of your mission and what's the worst part of it?
Oh, the worst part.
Yes, let's start with the worst part.
Let's start with the worst part. Yeah.
I love it when people talk about this, about like the worst parts too, because I feel like for so long people were like, it's the best time ever. I loved everything. And I'm like, everyone had bad experiences on their mission. Like, that's just life.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, let's hear it. I'm ready.
It was the cold. There was, again, that first area where I served up in Wakanai, we were in what was a bicycle shop. It was a 2-story building. And so in Japan, they don't usually use showers. There's a shower sort of area, but the most common thing to do is to have a ofuro. It's like a hot tub, but it's just a little tub, and you can immerse your entire body in it. You squat in it, and you take a bath like that. So this bath area in this building used to have an ofuro, but they took it out. Now an ofuro has a heater, and there's a pipe that's attached to the heater, and it's kind of about this round, and it connects to the wall, and there's a hole in the wall that takes all the steam and whatever, that stuff out into the outside. So there was no ofuro, there was no bath in the bath area, but the hole that led to the outside where the pipe used to be, there was a section of pipe, aluminum pipe, still there, and it was covered with plastic. That was the only thing separating the outside freezing air from the inside of the bath area. And so we had to take a shower in the morning before the heater warmed up in this really, really cold bath area with just that piece of plastic separating the freezing air from our shower. That was probably the worst experience of my mission, is having to take a shower in that freezing cold air.
Every single day.
Every single day while I was in that area. That was horrible.
That's like you get up in the morning and you're like, what a lovely, oh no, I gotta take a bath.
Yeah. It was horrible. And there's another experience where we were tracting. We went to this one door, and the guy realized who we were. We were missionaries. I don't know if he knew that we were missionaries for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or what, but he didn't like us. He actually picked up his snow shovel, and threatened us with the shovel. Get out of here. I don't like you guys. I don't want to hear anything about you guys. And we ran away very quickly.
I feel like running can be a very useful skill on a mission sometimes.
Yeah.
The dogs travel. Okay, I mean running for sure.
Yeah. I don't think I was ever threatened by dogs. That was that was kind of lucky for us, but good thing on my mission. The best experience I ever had was teaching this lady. We actually taught the whole family, her and her 5 children, I think is what she had at the time. And but she was the one most interested from the entire family. And we taught her for weeks, and there was always something that she couldn't understand or couldn't accept. I mean, she was the most difficult investigator we had, but she kept inviting us over to come and teach her. She liked the discussions for some reason. She just liked to talk about these things, religion things. So there came a point, though, where my missionary companion and I, we said, we've been teaching this lady forever, and it's like, we're not going anywhere. And we've invited members to come talk to her. And so one time we decided, let's invite this one particular member to go with us on a discussion. And it was a lady who was a member of the little branch there. She'd been a member for several years, and she had a sweet spirit. So we took her to the discussion, and I don't remember what the topic was at the time, but we did our lesson. We talked about different things, and she came up with her arguments and her concerns. And we just felt like we weren't quite getting through. And so we were really disappointed. We went home that night thinking, okay, I think we're just going to probably drop her. She's just not progressing. And it was a couple of days later, we were getting ready to exit the apartment, and we get a phone call. The phone rings, and my companion picks it up, and and I hear his conversation a little bit, and then suddenly his face lights up, and he says, "Elder, guess what? It's a sister. And you know what? She wants to get baptized." And
Wow.
we were just like, what? And yeah, it was it was this other sister that we'd brought over. I don't know what she said or what it was, but it was most likely just the spirit that she felt. And it was that one thing that just made her change. And it just touched her heart, so to the point where she said, "You know what? I'm going to get baptized." And so that was probably the high point of my mission, is where I got to baptize that sister into the church. And she was just a wonderful, wonderful member of the church, just really faithful. So yeah, that was really great.
That's
That's
awesome.
awesome. I feel like sometimes in missions, I mean, not always, right? But there's so many times where the people who take the longest, like, are really clearly very invested in learning, but take their time and take it seriously. I want to make sure that they're making the right decision. That sometimes those members are some of the strongest members who stay the most faithful. It's just really, it's cool.
Yeah.
So that's
I
really
agree.
neat. It's a really, really neat story.
So Alex, usually we like to give you a little bit of time to go over your personal self and give us a little background. But I feel like the topic tonight is going to be a really good one, and we'd like to kind of just go into that topic if you don't mind.
Go for it.
So if you want to refresh on the topic, it's basically when you gave your all and it still wasn't enough. So that's what we'll be discussing tonight. And that's one of the reasons why we have Christina here as well. She's a life coach, and she has a lot of experiences with this topic at hand and just within issues. And this topic can be anything from, relationships to personal, experiences. It doesn't have to be from divorce or anything like that. We can just collectively together just discuss this topic. So
I think it's a good topic. It's a very important topic.
it is.
Yeah, there's people that, like for myself, I'm going to speak for myself. I was in a relationship that was very one-sided, and I didn't recognize that for the entire, I was married almost 27 years, but I didn't realize how one-sided it was until the last few years. The idea that I had to please my spouse, that was my priority. But I didn't recognize that my spouse didn't have the same idea about me.
Unsighted.
Yeah. So there are people like that, unfortunately. Their brain is wired differently. They don't have the empathy or the same level of love capacity. And so their idea of a partnership is, I'm here because the other person is going to make me happy. But the problem is that person, there's no way, no matter what I did or how much effort I put into it, that I was going to be able to make that person happy. There was no level of satisfaction that I could reach to make that happen. So
Yep. They call that the trying to fill the Grand Canyon up with a squirt gun. That's the it's the level of love you're trying to give them. It's never enough.
Exactly.
Well, and it's one of those things where, often people who do that have that kind of outlook or behavior, like there's something, they're trying to fill something inside themselves, but they don't realize that like it has to come from themselves and that it can't come from, so they look to these external sources,
right,
as a way to say that will fill me up. And they look for people who are givers, right? Because of that, like thinking like, oh, this will fill up my void, right? But it doesn't, because all of that always has to come from within each of us individually.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
And I think fortunately and unfortunately, it comes with the experience as we age, we gain wisdom. It's not automatic for people to realize that, oh, I have to love myself first. It has become more popular these days to say self-love or self-care. But back when I was in my 20s, I thought getting married was the next best thing after graduating college. And we didn't talk about I should make myself happy first before being in a relationship. That wasn't a conversation I had. So just like maybe some of us here, we gave and gave and gave until we were depleted. And when things happen in our lives, such as divorce or maybe a breakup, then it just eats our self-confidence away, because we didn't realize that we actually don't need the other person to make us happy or to make us whole. So
yeah, and I think it's like one of those things too, where, because sometimes I think we can also talk in the single world a lot about like, oh, well, you have to make sure you're happy first. And I was like, well, I don't know if that's totally necessary, as long as you recognize that like it's your job to take care of your happiness, right? Like as long as you know that it's not the other person's job to make you happy, I think you're going to be okay, because there are going to be things that you're struggling, and you're always going to be growing and progressing. I think there are a lot of people who got married young who did understand that, right? Who like weren't expecting the other person to kind of make them whole. And it's just kind of having the perspective that makes a difference.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes as well, like I kind of stepped back and I was thinking about this topic yesterday when I was driving home, and I was like, oh, can I honestly relate to this topic? And I went into it thinking I really can't relate to it. But then as I was thinking a little more, I was like, no, I can, because there are certain things that you feel like you give so much and you're so excited and so happy to do that. And then all of a sudden the person's just there to kind of knock you down a couple pegs. And it's hard because you sit back and you think, okay, well, maybe I'm being selfish because, I wanted to do this originally and I had their best interests at heart, but maybe I'm the problem because I'm being selfish. And maybe it's just me, old me, I should say, how I would internalize it and put it back on myself.
And then there's another piece to that, because associated with that is guilt. Because now I feel guilty because I can't make her happy. That's my job. I'm thinking that's my job and I'm not doing it. I'm not fulfilling it. And so now there's guilt. I feel, like I'm not worthy because I'm not fulfilling my responsibility.
Right. And then when there's guilt, there's also shame, because I'm not doing A, therefore there's the self-judgment of, well, I'm not a good person at all, and we tend to justify that so much that, again, it wasn't helpful. It's not helpful if we're trying to get better from certain life situations or life events that take place.
Yeah, there was a time after the divorce, a couple of months where I didn't want to renew my temple recommend because I felt I was unworthy, because I felt like the divorce made me unworthy to be temple worthy. And I had to, consult with the bishop, and through various discussions, I realized it wasn't me. It wasn't something that I had sinned or that would make me unworthy for the temple. So that, that was a difficult thing to get over.
I had a
Yeah, you're told by them.
really,
No, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say, I had a really, not quite the same, but a similar experience, Alex, where I had a therapist who was LDS at the time. And I remember talking to my therapist and just saying, like, I'd finally come to the point where I was like, I think this marriage needs to end. And I remember saying, but what if this is a mistake? What if I'm sinning? What if this is the wrong choice? And he just looked at me and he was like, he's like, that's what the atonement is for. And it was really interesting because I hadn't really conceived of it that way in the past, but he was like, the atonement's there so that when you're doing your absolute best, that you can draw on that strength. And he's like, maybe it is. I mean, I think that was the first thing he said, was he's like, maybe it is a mistake, but that's what Christ is there for. And it really helped give me a perspective, not only on my divorce, but on a lot of things in life, where I'm like, well, if you're doing your absolute best and you're trying to make the healthiest, best choice, maybe sometimes there are going to be consequences to that are negative. Maybe there are some ways in which it might be a mistake, who knows, but like, that's what Christ is there for. That helped me a lot.
Yeah, I think sometimes as members of the church, we take quotes out of context. For example, there's David O. McKay's quote about success as a family. No other success can compensate for failure in the home.
Yeah.
And you think, I'm divorced. I failed. There's no other success that can compensate for that. But that's not true. That is not true. Like you said, it's the atonement that helps us overcome all things, including the guilt that we feel for things that sometimes are not our responsibility.
Well, it's true. I think that we also forget about agency and people's freedom to choose. And so we say, somehow when we get in a marriage, it's like now everybody's agency is lumped into a family agency. And so you kind of feel like, wow, I'm failing the whole family and I need to sacrifice, me. And I was in the same boat. You guys have all heard my story before, but I was in the same boat too, where I was just like sucking it up, basically just sucking it up, trying to make it work, whatever she wanted, whatever she would say I was doing wrong. And after a while, you just start to program yourself, because just to survive, you just kind of agree with all the negative comments about yourself. You're like, yeah, I know I'm a loser. Yeah, I know I'm a bad husband. Yeah, I know I'm a terrible father, but I'm working on it. And then you just kind of accept it. And then for all those years, you just kind of, you have negative self-talk, and then you're destroying yourself by doing that. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there in the audience that may still be struggling with negative self-talk, like, oh, nobody wants to be with me. I'm broken. I'm a loser. I'm no good. Who wants to date me? And they're still carrying that baggage of negative self-talk from just a habitual, being, as a habit of hearing that all the time, and then as a survival mechanism. So
right. So
And it's a habit of accepting blame, right?
yeah. You blame yourself for these things, and you think you're not, like I said, I'm terrible. I'm a terrible person, and nobody wants to date me. And then it transfers into your dating experiences, where you meet people and you see somebody that you're interested in, and you're thinking, oh, that person would never want to go out with me because I'm just not good enough for them. That talk is just self-defeating. It just doesn't, there's no use for it.
Yeah, it really
but
is.
it's hard. It's hard to get over.
It is hard. It is hard.
Especially when you're in a relationship that's just been like, I was married for 10 years, and infidelity was a challenge of the marriage. And when you're married for quite some time, you think that, at least in my experience, I thought, ooh, this is the challenge of our marriage, so we need to work on it over and over and over. And until such time that I felt like I was programmed to forgive and forget. But in all humanity of me, you can't really forget everything that has been done. Maybe you can forgive, but then if it's repeated behavior, then you're kind of just programmed to, is this what I'm supposed to be doing, like, for the next 20-30 years? And when I was presented divorce as the solution for my ex-husband, I was like, wait, what? But I thought we're working on it. But then, until you are removed from that situation, then you get a perspective of, oh, that wasn't normal. Yes, it's okay to get a divorce. It's okay to talk to your bishop. And at that time, my bishop was like, yeah, divorce is an option. I mean, we hate to recommend that to everyone, but it is an option for certain situations that is not working out for you, especially if it's for your mental health, your emotional well-being. But that was difficult. It wasn't like an overnight thing that answered every question in my marriage at that time. So I think there has to be a level of, I think, kindness and grace to ourselves when we go through these things, because sometimes these are not our fault. Sometimes it's induced by our partners, and it's difficult to acknowledge that, ooh, did I play a big part? It takes two to tango. I get that in a relationship, but I think when your heart is pure, that you didn't cause the strain in the relationship, then I think whether you're the perpetrator or the victim, there has to be a level of kindness and grace that you give to yourself. And I wish I knew that back then, because I was so hard on myself. I wish I did this. I wish I was more like this and that. And it didn't help me with my healing until a few years back. So yeah.
I want to adjust that quote that you used. It's used a lot by people who are married, who don't understand what divorce is like. They say it takes two to tango. And I hear that, and I've heard that in talks, and they're talking about two people that need to work on a marriage. And if the marriage fails, so both partners are at fault. And so I like to say it takes two to tango, but it only takes one to ruin the dance.
To step on somebody's toes.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's a matter of like, how do I react when somebody step on my toe? But it's not an immediate reaction from, ooh, I got hurt. You kind of have to, it's like a shock at first. I'm like, oh my gosh, this happened. What do I do?
Right.
So that's actually good. I like that, a different perspective of that quote.
Yeah,
and I've used that
that's a
in
really good
sacrament meeting.
I like that. I like that one a lot. I think too, sometimes one thing that can help people kind of get out of, because some people kind of take the victim mentality a little bit far right of being like, well, this person was not healthy and this caused, and I found it really helpful for me to think about, well, what are the things, like, what are the expectations I took into the relationship that contributed to my enabling this kind of behavior, right? And so that kind of idea, like Alex, you said a lot earlier, like, oh, like it's my job to make this person happy, right? Like, I think understanding like, oh, I brought that with me as well, which is probably also one of the reasons that like people were attracted to us who had this need, right? But kind of learning that that's not our job, right? And like changing our own perceptions of like, I think I just grew up thinking like, oh yeah, it's my job to like make people happy around me. And I was a big people pleaser. And so like letting go of some of those learned behaviors so that you can find someone where there's a healthy relationship, right? Because sometimes it's like those two just kind of connect together, because it's like on the one side you're like, oh, here's someone I can make happy, and the other person's like, oh, here's someone who can make me happy, right? And both of those are false assumptions.
Right.
Yeah, you
I
have to get
remember-
comfortable with yourself.
Yeah, I remember shortly after my divorce, a family member was like, you did nothing wrong. You just outgrew the situation and you outgrew the relationship. And I remember thinking, well, yes and no. I mean, I can own my part. I can recognize what I could have done to contribute to be a little bit better of a spouse and own it and improve for later. Could I have saved my marriage? Absolutely not, because I just couldn't save it. But I knew that I had tried. And it took me several years to work on the fact that I did try, I did give my all. But at the end of the day, it still was a decision that I made solely for myself. And then I had to work on that decision that I made. And sitting here today, I'm still completely content and happy with that decision. I don't look back and think, gosh, what could I have done differently? I've moved past that, and I've grown so much since then that I just don't even really think about it. So this topic was kind of tough for me, because I'm like, well, did I? You know, because I've literally moved past it. So it's interesting, you know, to see that view, you know, or your guys' perspective of it.
Well, and it's also that like giving our all changes over time, right? So like what our 100% was in some year with our marriage at some point or in some other relationship is not going to be our 100% 5 years down the road, or, you know, like it's as we change, like that parameter, I think, changes, just like growth in the gospel, right?
And everyone grows and change on a, I mean, who I was 5 years ago is different today. I think whether it's for the better, for the worse, nobody can judge that. You can only say that to yourself, or you can only determine that change or that growth for yourself. But the beauty of that is it's creating awareness. What I've learned over time is to, you know, whether this is, I mean, right now I'm on a like dating sphere phase, is like if it doesn't work out, that it's okay to sit with the emotions, with the thoughts, instead of like, I want to move on, I want to have this fast forward to 2023 so I can hit that goal of maybe getting married or whatever, because that was one of the things that I skipped, and I don't know how I skipped it, but I think I was so much in denial that the marriage fell apart, and I felt like I wasn't at fault. But then acknowledging at certain point after the divorce that I'm like, yeah, I did take part of, you know, I wasn't as sensitive, but it didn't help with the healing, because I didn't know how to heal, if that makes sense, because it was so convoluted as far as like, what am I supposed to do after this divorce? Because I feel so displaced in the society, let alone in the church. And so I think sitting with your emotions and your thoughts, and that knowing that everything serves its purpose along the way, truly helped me kind of, I mean, move on and accept that, yeah, I'm okay. I'm divorced, and I can proudly say that now. It wasn't in the past. So yeah.
I want to add that I could not have moved on from my divorce without the help of my bishop. He was instrumental in helping me to recognize where I was in relation to my membership, my worthiness, and what things I could do to move from where I was in a state of guilt to a state of forgiveness. Because really hard to forgive myself. I really felt like it was my fault. Everything that happened, it was me. I failed. All of these temple covenants that I was supposed to keep sacred, I failed to keep them. And now my marriage is broken and it's me. And if I had not spoke with my bishop, on a regular basis, I don't think I would be in the place I am right now. I think I would still be in that very dark, feeling unworthy, guilty sort of situation.
Well, I mean, and that's, after you said you've been married 27 years, right?
Yeah.
27 years of kind of feeling like it was all your fault. Like that's a hard space to get out of in terms of feeling differently. Right?
Yeah.
Can I ask you how long you've been divorced for?
8 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I will be 16 years in August. And at that time, we separated in 2006. It was not easy. The bishops, I feel like, were not given the proper tools on how to handle it at that time.
Yeah.
And I couldn't go to my bishop. And it was fine for me because I'm a very private person anyways. And so I didn't really feel like, if we're going to be in the same ward, I didn't feel like people needed to take sides, like just love us equally. But it became very, very hard. He's now completely inactive, and he never, in fact, the last 2 years of our marriage, he didn't even attend. But I just feel like I'm so glad that I see the church going this direction of offering support to the new singles, because I just didn't experience that. I didn't have it as a person. So
yeah, it's unfortunate that bishops don't have that training, and it's kind of hard because they're responsible for so many things, and to give them the training to be able to cover youth issues and adult issues and psychological and all of these emotional things, it's a lot to have to handle. And I have to give props to my bishop because he did a really good job. He was very caring. He was in a place where he was able to assist me out of where I was. And not all bishops are like that. I understand that.
Well, and
no, they're not.
I think one of the things too, like, I mean, just to give bishops training to say, like, know what is and isn't in your purview, right? Like, you're not a counselor. Like, being able to, like, one of the key jobs of a bishop is being able to offer love and support, and also direct people to resources that can help them, that are better suited, right? Because it's not even, I mean, even being like a judge in Israel, like that's not giving you license to know what's going on in people's hearts and minds through different kinds of struggles, or to know how to handle different situations. Like, you just don't have the training, right, as bishops to do that. And so knowing, like, okay, what's the resource that I can send someone to? But I'm really glad that your bishop was really supportive. I had a very supportive bishop, but it's still, I think it's hard for a lot of people who are married who've never been divorced to empathize. Like, I had a good friend who lost her child right about the same time that I was getting divorced. And I just noticed a lot of things about how willing and able people were to empathize with her struggle, because it was something that they could immediately see, like, oh, if this happened to me, this is how I would feel. I think with divorce, it's hard for people to put themselves in your shoes, right? Because they're not sitting there in their marriage going like, oh, what would I do if my spouse like cheated on me and I found out tomorrow that he'd been cheating on me for years, or whatever, or like what would I do if they up and left? Like, it's just not on people's minds, right? As opposed to kind of like losing a loved one or other kinds of grief. And so it's hard for people to think, like, how would I respond, or how would I feel, or what would I need if this was the place I was in?
I think one of the best advice I got from a friend, because I have my support system at that time when I was going through my divorce, but I kept relying on what my bishop is going to tell me. And so I was getting frustrated because, as Monica said, some bishop, married couples or even our bishop could not relate to the challenges of going through a divorce, let alone if it's infidelity involved, yada, yada. And so my friend was like, maybe she just got annoyed that I kept on going in cycles of what I was sharing with her. And she was like, Christina, your bishop is not your therapist. Okay. So, so and, and I was like, ding, ding, ding. That makes total sense. I have to go to other resources to sort this out. And I have the bishop as my spiritual, for spiritual guidance. And that helped, kind of separate how I perceive my bishop. And instead of like looking at it in a different and negative way, it became more, it was freeing for me to realize that I don't have to rely on him all the time. He has the ward to take care of, and I have other resources that could cater to what I'm struggling with in a one-on-one basis, and even maybe on a professional level. So yeah.
Right.
For
Yeah.
sure.
The bishop is actually, yeah, I agree. Bishop is a spiritual counselor.
Mhm.
And for me, that helped me spiritually in my spiritual state. But as far as emotional, psychological, all of those other areas, he wasn't trained to do that. And so I didn't rely on him to help me with those. I had to go to counseling,
Mhm.
someone who was trained in professional counseling to help me through those other areas that I needed to work through.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And-
that's highly important.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's luckily I had a bishop that he tried to help, and he recommended, hey, I think you guys should read this book together. And I can't remember the book, what the book was, but we did read it together, and it would give these scenarios of like situations these couples were in, and then you had to discuss it with your spouse. Like, does that sound like one of our situations? And it always seemed like every situation I was the bad guy. She's like, oh, that's you. And then she was the victim. And so when I went to marriage counseling, the marriage counselor was like, oh, that's like the worst book you could have ever read. Like for your situation, her being like, you got to love me and care for me, and it's all about me. Because in that book, that's what it was. It was like there had to be a situation where somebody said, you know what? Yeah, that I can see how I did that to you, and I'm really sorry. And I should not do that anymore. There was none of that. It was all like, that's you, and that's
Like
you.
if you have one person who's not taking accountability, right? Then it doesn't work very well. I think one of the,
So
oh, go ahead, Corey.
I was just gonna wrap it up and say, yeah, for people out there, go to counseling. There's some great LDS family and marriage counselors that understand the gospel, understand, stuff like that, and the manipulation that comes from your spouse. I mean, I was manipulated for like, oh, you're a temple recommend holder. Oh, we were sealed in the temple. Oh, you're a priesthood holder, and all those manipulative things.
Oh yeah.
Happening. Even when I'm sitting in the celestial room and she's whispering in my ear that God's speaking to her and telling me to humble myself, and God's telling me I have to repent and I have to do all these things. I'm like, what are you talking about? And then I had an LDS counselor who was able to kind of unravel my brain on that too. So
Yeah. You're a priesthood holder. You should be doing X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
yeah. And if you're not, then you're a horrible person. And you're like,
That's right. Exactly.
I guess I just suck at being a member of the church now too. So
Oh, that's awful. Yeah, and there are some really good non-LDS therapists too. Like if you have a really good therapist, you'll know, because they'll be the people who are totally respecting, like, and trying to understand your beliefs, where you're at, and work with you where you're at, as opposed to like encouraging you to like believe something different, they're not going to be there and be like, well, why are you a member of this church or what? They'll be like, explain to me how this works so that I can understand better how to help you through it. Right.
Yeah. Mine was not a member of the church, and she was very respectful of my beliefs.
Yeah. I have one who's not a member of the church right now too. And she's great. I think some of the best experience I've ever had with bishops have actually been where they've said, like, I don't know how to help you right now, like where there's the humility, like you could just see like the humility coming through. And I've had bishops before say, I don't know what's best. Like, I'm really glad that you're going to therapy. Like, I pray for you. Like, I love you and I want this to get better. I don't know like what the best thing is to do. Like, teach me how to help. Like, let us know as members what we can do to support you. Just because it gives that kind of opening of like, bishops don't know everything, right? But they can be there and they can listen and they can be supportive and they can pray for their members.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so true.
And I think too, understanding as well, like going back to the whole bishop thing, it's really, really hard when you come out of a marriage and you are submerged in single life. And you feel like your life over here is in marriage and you semi have a purpose, right? Because you're married, you have this title, you raising kids, you're, you have things to do. And now all of a sudden you're submerged in single life. And honestly, I think it's a lot harder for the men because I feel like the men do not get the support that they need within the church. The guys just kind of slap each other on the back, say, it's all right, you'll get there, but they don't have that support like we do. Sorry, my dog.
Rub some dirt in that thing and it'll feel better.
Right. And they don't have this proper, the men just don't have this ability to properly support each other. But then again, going back on the support, well, how do you support somebody, right? If you don't know what their needs are. So knowing what their needs are is a huge thing. And I know, like for me, I had tons of support from the women, the other sisters in the church. And I just watched the men in my group specifically just struggle because they literally have nobody or anything. We have the kids most of the time. They don't. So where's the support in the men? And I think that the church is slowly kind of getting that mindset of, okay, how can we help each other, everybody collectively in each situation, which is a good thing.
I think just making sure that members of the church are aware that we exist, first of all.
Yeah.
It was great that they acknowledged, that over 50% of the membership is now single.
Right.
That's a starting point. And it needs to increase, I think, and there needs to be more awareness of our needs. And you're right.
I do think it's getting there. I do.
Yeah.
I think that with awareness, it is getting there, and it's out there, and people are now talking about it, where before they weren't talking about it.
Right.
When I became single, just was like, let's not talk about it. Let's just go on and do your thing. But now people are talking about it. So it's really nice to see the changes that are being made just with awareness.
Yeah.
Sure.
I remember after my divorce, someone in our ward passed away, and a sister, and her husband during I went to the funeral services, the memorial services after, and I remember he walked into the cultural hall for the refreshments after the memorial service. He walked into the cultural hall and he was greeting people as they were walking in. And one of the sisters of the ward came up to him and adjusted his tie because it was kind of crooked. And the thought that came to me at that very moment was, when I got divorced, there was nobody to adjust my tie. I had to do it by myself. Wouldn't it be nice if after people go through a divorce, there was somebody that would acknowledge it and do something like that, just some small act of kindness to acknowledge that, hey, you're going through a rough spot, but here, let me just show you some kindness.
I think the acknowledgement is like is the biggest thing that people can do, right? Just to feel seen in that struggle is so meaningful. And I mean, what I was saying earlier about like the struggle that people have to empathize, I think there's a lot too of just looking at whether it's men or women, right? Looking at someone who's getting divorced and being like, oh, well, you obviously messed up in some way, or you failed, or this is, like all of the stuff that kind of goes on. And rather than doing that, just like seeing someone and saying, wow, that's hard. And I see you. Like I got a note from a member in my ward. I'd felt really, really alone. And she just left a letter, like a card under my door that just said, hey, like, I know you're going through this and I can't imagine how hard that would be. And it meant a lot, just like that one little acknowledgement of like, I see you.
Yeah.
And I see you struggling means a lot.
Yeah. And I think it's important to, aside from relying or aside from using the resource of the church, it's important to know what our own resources are, like find out who you can trust when you go through, divorce or a breakup or anything serious life event wise, because you'd know that those people will have your back. And there are of course other people who are just there for the story. And so having that tight, don't let go of your BFF as of I think that has just been my experience, because I was so ashamed to share what I was going through that it took me 6 months from when my ex-husband said that we're going to get a divorce to even tell a soul that I was going through a divorce, because of the guilt and the shame, because I was trying to figure out like, what am I guilty of, but I'm feeling so shameful about it. And so when I finally told, and this is like my best friend who you'd think would be the first person that you'd tell, but then you have all these, at least I had the impression of, if I tell a soul, then my life is gonna crumble. It's gonna be totally no longer in denial, because I had to lie for my ex-husband about his whereabouts whenever we go to events. And so I felt that having a really good support system, and that it's okay to share what you're going through with people that you trust, will make a difference in that journey, in that experience. They're not going to make it all better overnight, but just to know that somebody is there for you and to listen with your struggle, and the acknowledgement, like you're heard and seen, as what Monica said. I think that's a beautiful part of having this type of experiences.
Yeah, for sure. And the trust being huge, right? Like,
Yes.
making sure that it's someone who's earned your trust. But it can feel like, I really relate to what you said, Christina, about feeling like your world's going to crumble, right? Because I think sometimes just saying these things out loud and acknowledging them can feel really overwhelming. Like, it can almost feel like, well, that's going to give it more power, right? In my life, or it's
real. It's like, this is true now.
Yeah, or I'm not going to be able to compartmentalize it as well, right? And kind of keep it in its box so that I can like function during the day, right? Like, yeah.
I think that when people talk about, like, am I good enough? I think that's the key. I think that's the part that that the topic that we have at hand, because you do feel like you didn't put in enough effort. You feel like, I somehow, because you're programmed for all those years to say, okay, I'm trying to love you the way you want to be loved, and doing all the things you're saying I'm not doing. And then in the end, you're like, okay, I'm out. I tapped out. And then you feel like a quitter. You're like, because all the responsibility was on you. And so then, and then in my case, it really even sucked, because publicly I felt like the bad guy and the loser, because she would go to church and she's like, oh yeah, I she had the affairs, and so she used it to kind of make it all about her. She's the victim, and I sinned and everybody's supporting me but my husband. And so like everybody at church knew what she did, and I'm like the jerk who's not taking her back and being a forgiving person. And of course, I'm sure she said that. So, it kind of plays on you. Like you still feel like it's not good enough. Like I wasn't good enough. I wasn't even good enough to help her through her repentance process and stay with her.
Yeah.
That's the thing I learned from this whole thing is that
I gave her 3 strikes and still not enough. So.
Well, that's the thing I learned after this entire experience is I am good enough. I'm okay.
So at what point were you able to feel that you're good enough? At what point in your life or experiences along the way?
It took several months after the divorce, and like I said, counseling with a bishop on a regular basis. where I finally got to the point where I realized it wasn't me, or it wasn't all me. And that I hadn't failed, and that I was temple worthy, and that Heavenly Father loved me, and that he wasn't angry with me for what I'd gone through. But it wasn't an easy journey. It took a lot of effort on my part and my bishop, and working together.
Yeah, for sure. And it's different for everybody, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know that I had a moment where it wasn't the end of my journey for sure. So I was separated from my ex for 2 years before we got divorced finally. And he had kind of emailed me like several months before we got divorced and said, hey, I want to talk about this. Like, I want to know kind of your reasons for getting the divorce, because I don't feel like I fully understand. I want to talk about the things that I did and how that contributed to stuff. And I was like, oh, accountability, this is great, right? And then he was like, I said, sure. I came back and said, yeah, we can talk about this. And he said, well, let's wait until after the divorce, just so that if it doesn't go well, it doesn't make the process harder. I was like, okay. So we went and talked afterwards. And I remember like we sat down and he was like, okay, so what did you want to talk about? And I was like, well, in your email, like you said you wanted to talk about these things. So he was like, okay. So I started to tell him like, well, here, like, these are my reasons. And I was pretty specific. It was really hard for me to be that specific. And afterwards, he just looked at me and he said, so you have no reasons. And it was like, that moment was like the first time that I felt like this was the right choice. Like he couldn't even see it when I was telling him what they were, right? That this was a problem. But it still took time after that to kind of really come out of that space of like, well, did I do enough? Is this all my fault? I think it's different for everybody, but once in a while there'll be like little moments of clarity and you just have to hold on to those to be like, yeah, this is like, I worked really hard. Like maybe I could have done more, but that's okay. Like this wasn't a healthy relationship for a lot of reasons. And this person wasn't changing, right? Like they weren't working with me on it to make it better.
And
Yeah,
I want,
oh, go ahead.
I just
Sorry.
wanted to add that realizing that I was good enough is different from healing, because the healing process took a little bit longer. And I guess that's a whole different topic, but there is a difference. At least for me, it was a difference.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
that's true.
yeah, I think for me, I think that we carry some of this baggage into like our dating world too, because I find myself struggling with like compromising myself. Like if say somebody's really into me and maybe we're talking and maybe going out on some dates and I don't feel like it's the same, I feel that obligation, like, well, they like me, and so I guess I'm in. I guess I'm all in, even though I may not feel like I feel the same what they feel. I'm like, well, I feel that it's hard to describe. It's like obligation. I feel obligated now to like participate. And I think that's just some leftover residual stuff, like in the relationship where, oh, you're in a marriage, make it work. And, you're obligated to make it work. And so I think we have to be careful in our dating world not to fall back into those patterns, because then you wind up meeting somebody and then, they end up asking you to marry them instead of you asking them to. So then, because I was proposed to and I was, pressured into marriage. And so then you start going, am I doing the same crap I'm doing before?
So we would like to actually just kind of go into some audience questions. We feel like this topic is a really good one, and we'd like to start a little bit earlier. The chat has a lot of really great information. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. We will continue just talking, and then we'll ask you to unmute and video when you're called to ask the question.
And we actually had a hand earlier. Oh, good. She raised her hand again. Barbara, I promised her that she could be first because she had a comment earlier. So
you're awesome.
Too.
Are you there?
Hi, Barbara. She's my friend.
Hi, Alex and Michael and all my other friends. Anyway, I think this is a wonderful discussion, and I just had a couple of points that I wanted to make. And one is that that bishops are just people, and this is one of the drawbacks of having a lay leadership. is that just about the time they get released is they've kind of experienced everything and they've gotten good at it. But so sometimes, we're the guinea pigs that help them learn and get these skills to deal with people in our situations. But I think that the church has made a lot of progress, like with the addiction programs and things like that, that to address these real world issues that before we used to be like, I actually had a guy say this to me, that he just thought if we're both members of the same church, that we could just have a la-ti-da good relationship and it would always work out. And I thought, well, that's interesting. But anyway, the other, I worked in public affairs for the church for many years. And one of the things that I got, in addition to the stigma that some people, I didn't have so much of it, but I hear a lot of the stigma attached with getting divorced in the church, not so much now, was that the other members of other faith communities and the community that I served used to say, I thought Mormons couldn't get divorced. I thought, so that was a whole nother situation where we had to, bring awareness to them that we're in the world just like everybody else. But the one thing I really think is important is we've talked a lot tonight about guilt and healing. And I think that there is a lot of inherent guilt, like Corey and everybody else has said, I didn't do enough, I'm not good enough, and I'm a failure. And this does take time. But the distinction that I think is important to make is that there are issues and deal breakers to take into consideration that require education and support. And that would be like the 3 A's. If you're familiar with Dr. Laura Schlesinger, the 3 A's would be adultery, addiction, and abuse. And if any of one of those exists in a relationship, generally the others either exist or are not far behind. And those are the deal breakers when there's really nothing that you can do to fix it. If it's financial or intimacy or communication, by all means, keep the family together and work on it. But these are things that have to be addressed. And mental illness is another one that I hear a lot of from people in the church. And so this is where special education and support needs to take. And I'm a proponent of therapy, good therapy. So thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Very good
I think
point.
too, it's,
Now the
I like that.
3 A's, yeah.
Oh, sorry, Christina.
No,
I was
go
gonna say,
ahead.
I like that she brought up mental illness because I think that feeds into things like addiction and abuse, and right, it's like a lot of those behaviors stem from people having mental illnesses that are not being treated, that are not being taken seriously, right? Yeah, so it's an important one to put in there.
Right.
And
And
then
create
be
the awareness,
careful.
because again, there's a stigma when you have the label, and I
Yeah.
think nowadays we're moving forward to like it's becoming hopefully more normal to take care of our mental and emotional well-being.
Yeah. I love
Yeah, and
that
be
talk that
careful with
Elder
those.
Holland gave, right? On mental illness, because I think it was one of those things where he was like, I've struggled with this. I think sometimes like it helps people to hear from like people in positions of authority to say like, this is normal, like this happens, people deal with this, right? Yeah, go ahead, Corey.
Yeah.
And I was going to say there's a distinction that the marriage counselor who was LDS had said, and she had talked to temple presidents and stake presidents because she had a lot of questions too that came up. And the distinction is that mental illness, like the actual diagnosable mental illness, that there is some grace there from the Savior because they don't have the capability to make good decisions because of their mental state. But personality disorders are different. People who are narcissistic or borderline or some of those personality disorders, they do know the right from wrong, and their actions, they do commit things, and it's not a mental illness. Because that was one thing I kept asking was, I'm like, am I not showing grace here because of it? She's borderline, and had she been diagnosed as like bipolar depression or something, that would be something that would give her grace and maybe get her some help. But we have to be careful we don't that the personality disorders don't get lumped into mental illness too. So
I don't know. Sometimes I think personality disorders are mental illness, but the thing is that people who have those disorders have to be willing to acknowledge it and get help for themselves. And so no one should continue to make themselves vulnerable to that if a person is not doing that. And that's the tricky thing with personality disorders, is that part of the personality disorder is they are not going to acknowledge it, right? Like it's very hard for them to acknowledge what they have and what's going on. Because like my mom has borderline personality disorder as well. And there are a lot of times where I'm like, I really don't think that she's being malicious. I really don't think that she has a different perception of reality. I don't think she is doing this stuff on purpose to hurt people, but she's not willing to accept the problem and to try to find help for it. Like the only way, there's no medication, right? The only way you can find help is to say, I have a problem, and to work on it. And so
counseling works with personality disorders, not medication. It's not a chemical imbalance.
Exactly.
So that's why I was saying, like, if they commit adultery, if a person with schizophrenia commits adultery, they're in a whole different mental state. And you can say, okay, yeah, they had mental problems, that's why they committed adultery. But a narcissist does it because they're selfish and they want to stroke their ego, and a borderline does it because they feel abandonment issues and they want somebody in their life that's going to show them appreciation. So, it's more of a personality thing that they're making those choices on.
Yeah. When
So
I would
Michael has a
recommend,
question.
oh, could I add
Michael
one
has-
more thing in, Terry, first?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to put this in the chat too, but one book that I would really recommend to people who have experience with people with personality disorders is Whole Again, because it talks about how like these disorders, narcissism, personality, any kind of personality disorder, they're called B cluster personality disorders, come from someone being wounded, right? And it was really cool to kind of, on the one hand, see the ways in which those people can actually be treated, but also like when you've recovered from being in a relationship with someone like that, like what you can do as a victim of that behavior to be whole again and to heal the wounds that it left in you. It's really good. I'll put it in there so people can read it.
That's a good book. I read the Walking on Eggshells was a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
And then when I decided that, or when the marriage counselor said probably divorce is the only answer here, because she left therapy and would not go to marriage counseling, then I read the book called Splitting, which is a play on words because borderline split you in all good or all bad, but the book also is a play on words for like splitting up. So it's called Splitting: How to Divorce a Narcissist or Borderline.
Yeah.
All right, Michael, if you would like to unmute yourself and put your camera on, or you can leave it muted and you can ask your question.
So thank you, you guys. This has been really helpful. I wish I could have been here on time. Anyhow, I just wanted to ask you guys how you dealt with, so in my case, my spouse was the one that left. She was the one that decided it couldn't be salvaged and all this stuff. And whereas I wanted to keep working on the marriage and I wanted to try and I wanted to to go through with it. Ironically enough, I was the one that actually filed for divorce. She left and then didn't do anything about it. But anyhow, point is my question is how did you guys get through that? Where you, I think Alex, you're kind of similar to my situation, if I remember right, where you wanted to work it out, but your wife didn't.
Right.
Anyway, that I've come to, it's taken me, I've been divorced for 3 years, separated for 4. And it's been only in the last few months that I finally actually come to peace with it. But yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, it's extremely hard. Yeah, it's I think for me, I think once you realize, once you can deal with the guilt, because we've been conditioned to be told we're the problem in the relationship, and then once you get that divorce, you have to come to terms with that. You have to say, this wasn't my fault. I did all I could do, and it still wasn't enough. That's the title of the podcast. And you have to accept that. You have to say, wow, I really needed a partner that was willing to work with me on this, because it can't be one-sided. And that's, I think everybody's experience here is that it was one-sided. It was like, hey, I cheat sometimes, and and I'm sorry, but you got to forgive me, because that's what Christ does. And if you're a good Christian and you're a good member of the church and a good priesthood holder, you would forgive and let me continue living with you and maybe still screwing up. and you just kind of have to come to terms with the fact that you didn't have a partner that was willing to work with you. That's just my 2 cents, but.
So
And
I have a little bit of a take on that as well. I think for me, it was, I just took a step back and I thought, okay, what can I do to improve myself for the future? And I concentrated on myself because I'm not going to worry about my ex. My ex was already doing his thing. There was nothing for me to worry about with him. So I just wanted to work on myself, and I wanted to, one, try and figure out my thought process in the entire thing and try to heal a little bit, but also to try and make myself better for the future. So that's what I did for myself.
I think for me, what I did was, well, it was sort of like an aha moment when I realized that, okay, he's not coming back. We're not going to get back together. There's zilch of hope of getting back together. I think for me, it was just like, oh my gosh, it was an overwhelming feeling of, ooh, I can do a bunch of things in my life, but what do I want to do? So I kind of had to go back to when I was still single, and I was like, what were the things I wanted to do but didn't because I got married? And so I kind of start building on it, kind of going back to old hobbies that I didn't or stopped doing when I got married, and maybe trying new things. I think the experience itself, I started with moving out of state. That was just me. I had the opportunity to move out from Utah, and that helped me a lot. So it was a change of environment for me. And I know there are some of us who cannot move due to, child custody arrangement and whatnot, but creating a new environment for you, new experiences, doing things that you've never done before, just going back to your old self, kind of like your teenage dream. That was for me. I started listening to Britney Spears and Backstreet Boys, and I was like, this feels really good. So
That's
I kept
awesome.
building on that.
Well, and
And-
sometimes, like, even if you can't leave the same town, like just going to a different physical space,
Mhm.
going to a different part of town, like going, like there are lots of things you can do to change up your environment that help a
Yeah,
lot.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I
moved
agree
to
with
Mexico
Christina.
for 4 years. So right after my divorce, I moved to Mexico for 4 years. So that was a good break. I got far away.
You got the best tacos and quesadillas.
I didn't move, but I agree with Christina. There are some hobbies and stuff that I like to do, and I couldn't do them while I was married, and so I
You're
went
never
back to
allowed
those.
to.
Yeah, I wasn't allowed to do them because that's
No,
just
Alex,
I've been
you could have done them, but you weren't allowed to do them because
that-
you would have been a selfish jerk
Exactly.
who did not care for your wife and your kids because your hobbies came first.
exactly, absolutely, exactly.
I've been down
Yes,
that road too. We've all been down that road.
and I think as members of the church, we have to recognize too that that's the adversary that's telling us that we're not good enough, and that we were the ones that failed, and that we're the sinners in this relationship, and it's false, and we need to
Yep.
overcome that feeling and realize the grace of our Heavenly Father in our lives to overcome that.
Yeah, for sure. And I
Well,
think
thanks for that
too,
question.
yeah, it's a great question. I love in thinking about the ways in which people like this kind of use your goodness against you. Right? Like if you're a good person, you'll do this. I said this in the chat earlier, but I think it's just always really good to remember that forgiveness does not mean making yourself vulnerable to somebody who's going to hurt you. Right? I had a friend once who compared it to like, you can forgive someone who's committed a horrible crime, right? You can love them the way the Savior loves them, but that doesn't mean that you're going to put them in a situation where like those triggers or whatever that caused them to commit that crime are there, right? You're probably not going to let them babysit your kids, right? Like it's like you can, so you can love people, you can forgive them, you can let go of that resentment in your own heart, but that doesn't mean that you have to like go back or that you have to stick with it or that you have to put yourself in an abusive situation. That's not what the Savior wants, and that's not what forgiveness is.
Right.
Exactly.
Corinne has a question. So
Go ahead, Corinne.
Yes, it's Corinne. That's fine.
Oh, sorry.
I am great. I'm just wondering, would Alex be willing to retell the tie analogy? My audio went completely bad, but there's been great feedback about it on the chat.
Let me get my notes together. No.
Ready.
So I was relating the story of when a member of our ward lost his wife, and during the funeral service that I went to, he was there in the cultural hall, and as people were coming into the cultural hall, he would greet them. And one of the sisters, as she went up to him, noticed that his tie was crooked and adjusted it. And I thought, you know, when I got divorced, there was nobody like that came up to me to adjust my tie, if you will. So I just thought that was something that I noticed was different about the different experiences that we went through, divorce and losing somebody through death.
Okay, thank you so much. That is really good, because I think that there is a difference, because I've felt that way as far as the grieving process. I don't feel like I've been, when I'm sad about it, people don't understand it. They say, but this is a good thing. This needed to happen. It's like, no, this is a horrible thing that needed to happen. And I am grieving. And I've had fabulous support, but in that one area, people have not understood that I'm very sad about this. And so I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Now that's one of the empathy gaps, right, that we were talking about earlier, where it's hard for people to understand that you could grieve over losing something that was hard for you to deal, but it's still you're grieving over the loss of a loved one, essentially, of a relationship, of all the possibility that could have been in the future, of all of the hopes that you'd had for that relationship going into it. Like, you're grieving for all of that.
Mhm.
And that's not easy, even when it was the right thing to do, even when you're better off, like none of that matters. It's still a grieving process, and it's really difficult. Thanks for
Right.
bringing that up, Corinne.
I wanted to say to them, but a marriage died. Is
Mhm.
that spouse dying? Because a spouse, you get to be with them again. A marriage died here. This is not okay. I don't know. That's been a difficult thing in my journey.
Yeah. I think the hard part too is that you sit at church and you hear the people get up and fast and testimony meeting and talk about families, and they love them, and they're just so happy to be together forever. And they were in the temple, and I'm just sitting in the back going, I'm a loser.
Yeah. I think with the grieving process too, I mean, sometimes we try to stop it because we're afraid of the judgment of other people. And I think when you're sad, you're just sad. And I think one of the best advice I got from my therapist is like, do your ugly cry, just cry it out. Don't stop your emotions, because I was so used to having this facade of everything is working out in my life, when I was really so crushed deep inside. And so I took a moment. I'm like, all right, that ugly cry is gonna happen anytime soon, and I'm just gonna let it happen. And it definitely did, and it felt good. But did it only happen once? No, I had so many ugly cries.
Yeah.
And I embraced the moment.
Well, and we can't like bear each other's burdens if we're not willing to show our burdens,
Yeah,
right?
the vulnerability and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lori had a question.
Not so much a question, just a comment that came up when
Corinne?
Kareen.
That's right. I know it was like a unique.
Kareen. That's
Kareen.
awesome. That's a cool name.
But just that something that was said to me that really helped me early on. I've been divorced for about 14, 15 years, and similar type of thing. It's just people don't know how to deal with it. And so they do what they can to help themselves feel better and feel like they are helping. But something that someone said to me once is that it's no different than someone who lost a spouse, because I am grieving the death of someone who is still alive. And that kind of made that connection for me. And then also to just realize that I went and I found support in people who had dealt with trauma and who had been there, and where they not only allowed me to, but encouraged me to unapologetically grieve and to feel that loss and to cry and to be angry and to have all of those emotions, because I'm allowed to have all of those emotions. And that's what God wants me to lay at his feet is those emotions and those struggles that I'm having, here they are. And then that's the only way that he can remove them. If I'm constantly trying to take that back and I'm constantly trying to say, no, I will deal with this. I will get over this. I will do this. That's me taking that back and telling God, nope, I've got this. Right. And instead he's asking, just turn it over to me. Just let me have all of your anger, all of your swear words, all of your grief, all of your pain, and try to let it go. And the more that I deal with that is because I'm just trying to take that back, because if I deal with this, then that will help me get over this. And I've kind of learned that that's the exact opposite, but just a thought that I had. So I just wanted to share that. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great thought. And it's what's interesting is this new technology that we're using. I mean, this podcast is here to, so because a lot of us here in this podcast have been through similar situations, and the purpose of this is that we can discuss these topics, we can talk about them within a gospel, with some gospel principles wrapped around it, but we can also make it raw and talk about how it really affected us. And then you get some validation from somebody who said, yo, I've been through that, and here's how I handled it, and here's how I dealt with it, or here's a book I read. You know, when I was going through my divorce and I was trying to learn about borderline, the only thing that I had was the time, because it was prior to like really having Facebook groups and Zoom and all that, was Yahoo groups. And so the book, Walking at Eggshells, recommended some Yahoo groups. And when you join them, it's just email. So you get an email that says, hey, this person posted a comment. And to hear people from around the world having the exact same conversation, like my spouse did X, Y, Z. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my spouse did the exact same thing, used the exact same nouns and verbs. Like, this is eerie. But to hear that I'm not alone was so helpful. And so
validating.
Actually, that made me think of something, Corey, because I was in a support group, and they constantly say, when you first go to these meetings, you're hearing your story told from someone else's lips, because they're sharing their story, but you see so much truth and validity in it from your own experiences, that rawness, that openness, that sharing of what we go through is the only way that other people don't feel so isolated and alone. They feel like there are people out there who do understand, and that they don't have to just stay in this little cookie cutter situation, that they can go outside of that and go and seek that. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, great. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's
Well, thanks
great.
for that. That was really good. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I think Katrina has their hand up. Go ahead, Katrina.
Hi. So I just was curious, something that I've noticed myself struggling with now, years later, re-entering the dating world. A couple things that I think kind of continually come up for me are, I struggle with drawing the line between being Christ-like, because the atonement's real, right? And you hear everybody else's stories and you think, well, I don't know, this might be raising some red flags for me, but the atonement's real. Maybe I should give this person a chance. And so kind of that struggle with where to draw the line with being Christ-like, and where to be smart and kind of learn from your experiences and protect yourself. But also something that recently came up, I was recently dating someone, and I feel like sometimes maybe we swing too far in the other direction, where this guy got upset because I had previously made plans with friends, and these were girlfriends, so it's not like it was even friends of the opposite sex. And I don't know if I was really harsh in it because of the experiences of my past abusive marriage, but I was like, I'm never getting rid of my friends, and you just better like deal with it. And so how we deal with these situations that come up, and kind of trying to navigate, I think sometimes we get in our own way, and it's hard to know like where to take stands on certain things, and how to navigate this new world after we've been through those things.
Mhm.
So I don't know if anybody's had some success in dealing with those issues, or if everyone else is just struggling along with me.
Well,
Yeah,
we are
Corey.
struggling.
Go ahead, Corey.
are struggling, but you're not alone.
Yes.
One of the things that I had done for me is to understand the atonement at a deeper level, which, kind of prior to that, I've always kind of pictured the atonement as like, oh, we're all sinners and the atonement saves us. But what I didn't realize that the atonement also, he suffered all things, like all things. He suffered when you lose a child in death. He suffered when you are the victim of a crime or a victim of whatever. He suffered all that. So I knew at that point, I'm like, wow, this horrible feeling of my marriage falling apart, finding out about all these affairs, it's just crushing me. And how do I deal with this? And so what I realized is that the atonement doesn't just alleviate my pain of when I sin, and my guilt, but he also relieves that pain of what I'm going through, if that makes any sense. And so what I did is I did a lot of praying, just asking the Savior to take that pain away, to help me deal with that and to become a forgiving person. And what I found out is that I could forgive, but I didn't have to stay with that person.
Right.
That person wasn't willing to change, wasn't going to take steps to change. I was just going to get injured again. So I had to walk away. And there was peace and comfort came, just like peace and comfort when you're repenting and you feel that peace and comfort. That peace and comfort came when I was trying to deal with the guilt of leaving my wife, and that was the hard part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, I mean, I want to answer Katrina's question, like how, because I went through the hows and whys and all that. I kind of have my own formula, like step-by-step process per se. So when I decided that, I want to try dating again to see, and it went in different phases in my life. First, I wanted to see like what's out there. So my first step is what's my goal? And then the next step that I usually ask myself is, why is this goal important to me? Because then it would clarify the steps that I'm gonna do next. And then once I answered that question of like, why is dating or joining a dating app, if let's say we want to be more specific, important to me, if I answer that question, then the next step I would do is like figure out if there's something I need to resolve as I experience my goal. So if I want to share my experience about this, I joined a dating app. I'm like, it's so scary. I was like, this is like so, it was a different feeling. I'm like, I have come to this. And so acknowledging that it may be uncomfortable for you, and also maybe an exciting experience for you, kind of like embracing that since this is my goal, I'm gonna just, stick to this and see how it unfolds for me. And then why is it important to do a dating app? Because I'm new in town. I don't know anybody. I don't have friends. And maybe this is a channel for me to say, yeah, this is a good way to meet people. But then I have some reservations as far as, joining a dating app. And so I had to figure out, like, if I'm going to join this, what are my hesitations? What do I need to figure out along the way as I swipe left and right, And so would that be safe to dating? And so along the way, I was open to the experience, even though it was scary, but it opened up opportunities and it opened up like the boundaries that I need to set for myself. And I want to acknowledge Katrina's awareness of like, hey, these are my friends. They are the ones that they will be my ride or die at the moment, if not the boyfriend or the partner or whatever, the dating guy. So I think to set boundaries for myself and being more vocal that things are not working out. And it didn't, again, it was an entire process. I was dating and I was sharing to a friend when I realized I have all the same experiences with guys ghosting me and all that. And I was like, well, what's the common thread here? And I'm like, I'm the common thread. And so I figured maybe I have to switch my gears as far as like how I look at dating people versus dating in general, because it was so hard. But I think the first, it's a baby step. You learn how to communicate, you set your boundaries, and if your gut feeling is saying, this isn't right, then trust that gut instinct, or that womanly instinct per se. And again, it's not going to happen overnight. We're going to have ups and downs and bumps in the roads in dating, but I think the openness and the awareness that it creates, like, just go through it. And then if it doesn't work out, you're not a tree, the person is not a tree, you can move, all of that stuff. Yeah.
That is so true. I've been on dates where we've done the online communication and everything, but then we meet in person, and when I see them and shake their hand and talk to them, that the first few little bits of conversation, I know this isn't going to go anywhere. You just feel it. I felt it, but I still went through with the date because it's just, we just become friends. I mean, we have a nice, enjoyable time together. I always made that commitment to myself, is that if I'm on a date with somebody, I want to make sure that they have a nice, enjoyable time, no matter who they are or what kind of person they are. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay.
I coined a term a few months back. It's called undercover dating. So be careful. You might think you're friends, but somebody might be undercover dating you.
That's funny. It just means like that they might want something more. Like they might be like, yeah, we're friends, and just waiting for the point at which you're no longer just friends, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
waiting
they're
for
hoping
something
you'll change
more.
their minds. So they do little like niceties, and yes, we're just friends. I know we're just friends, but, and then it's like they're hoping to kind of wear you down.
Yeah.
Well, but let me say this. Dating was kind of scary at first, but the process of meeting women who are normal helped me through the healing process, because I didn't have that in my marriage. And so I started to understand this is what a true relationship should be like, a true friendship. And so that really helped me a lot.
Yeah. In fact, I would add to that, Alex, that I think there have been some situations and opportunities that I've had with guys where it's been purely platonic, right? And it's helped me so much, like do stuff with them and realize like, oh, like people can be normal. Like we can have normal interactions, and just in terms of healing is really, really powerful. And I think it's important to recognize too, that whenever you start dating, like a lot of it's going to depend on like where you're at and what kind of work you need to do, and realizing that, right? Like, because for me, I tended just to like trust everybody kind of implicitly. And so like for me, learning that like no one deserves my trust, like that my trust has to be earned. And that doesn't mean that I hold them off at like, however far away, and I'm like, I'm suspicious of you all, right? It doesn't mean that, but it just means like learning that trust is not something that you just give to someone just because they're like showing interest in you, right? That has to be earned. Recognizing that like when you're dating, that you don't owe anybody anything, which I think is really hard sometimes to integrate. That like sometimes I would go out with somebody and be like, well, like maybe I owe them another chance. And I'd have friends that are like, you don't owe them anything. Like that's what dating is. They're going out to get to know people. You're going out to get to know people. Like there's nothing, you don't owe them anything. I think a lot, like recognizing those little things that are particular to you, Katrina, or to anybody else, right, who needs that advice is really, really important, and kind of zeroing in on the things that you need to do to help you feel comfortable and move forward.
And another thing I learned along the way is like, do not attach yourself to an outcome, because that brings expectation, and expectation is all in our head. It's our la la land reality per se that we create, because that's what we want, versus, hey, this is my reality right now. I'm going to go out on a date. I'm not even sure if by the end of that date, I'm still going to be talking to that person. And that's okay. Because at the end of the day, I did my part, because the goal is, if your goal is to be in a relationship or be with somebody who deserves your love and you deserve them, and owning that you deserve that healthy, loving relationship that you so want, then by all means, like, go through the 99 until you get to the one. I'm probably still on my 86. I don't know, maybe. So
Yeah, it's true. I like to say that expectations are resentment in utero.
what was that? I'm sorry.
I like to say that expectations are resentment in utero.
Yeah, I mean, the more yes, I've got some of that was when I kind of dipped my toes in the dating pool the very first time, and this was probably like 4 years ago. And 4 years ago, I was just like, I don't even know what I'm doing, but I'm gonna do it anyway because I need to be validated. So that was the goal. And so people will validate you endlessly on a dating app, but then the quality of the people that you're getting is not there. So you kind of, I mean, but the expectation and the reality does not normally like meet halfway through when the expectation is so far off. You know, you want a loving relationship, but at the end of the day, you're doing this because you want to be validated. But I think along the way too, once you do those steps, your little process, your baby steps, then it opens up more experience and more and awareness, and it can be disheartening and disappointing at times, and that's okay. It's part of life. I think that's how I view it. But one of the rules that I have is do not overextend yourself if that person does not deserve you, you know. So
Yeah, I had my heart broken, but it was a good experience. I look back on it and I don't regret it at all. It was a beautiful time.
yeah.
Well, it's diversity. Well, I think we had one more hand. Was there Michael?
Yep,
Was that
Michael.
there?
Yep.
Where'd you go, Michael? Come on up. Unmute.
I'm here. I'm just
Okay.
multitasking. So I wanted to just say I appreciate what you said, Alex, about having good, healthy friends after going through a divorce with somebody that's a mess. Yeah, my ex-wife is mentally ill, so there's some issues there, and I I am so grateful. I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say, add on to what Alex said. And I'm grateful for very good friends. Barbara, you're one of them, that are just fantastic, that you can talk with and live some of life with, and just those close female friends for me are so important. And it's totally helped me become a more well-adjusted person, and to learn what I want when I do find the right person and I do get married again. I've learned I pick up on those traits that I want and that I don't want. And it's so good. Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. And yes, I've had a heartbreaking experience too, Alex. And I do look back on it now, you know, in dating, and I'm grateful for that. It's been such, that was a good experience.
Well, good. I'm glad. Yeah. Get out there and get those experiences. I mean, that's how you get better. But yeah, I think we had a really good discussion tonight, everyone. And we had some great questions, great comments. I hope everybody got something out of this. I did. I've learned a little more every time we have this podcast, and I get to talk to interesting people like Alex. Alex has a very Zen Japanese spirit, very calm,
And
a
then
little
there's
goofy.
Jesse.
He is a little goofy. But we appreciate you coming on, Alex, tonight, and sharing your story and sharing your insights and having a very interesting discussion. So
Yeah, for
Thank
sure.
you.
This was great.
It's been a pleasure. It's been awesome.
Thank you,
well,
Alex.
great. So this comes to the point where we're going to turn off the recording and stop streaming, and we're going to have a little after party, and everybody can kind of turn their mics and cameras on, and we're going to enjoy a little after party, a little bit of everybody's company. We could continue the conversation about the topic, or we could talk about Star Wars, or Ryan and I could talk about computers and explain about how awesome Linux is. And but anyway, see, he's got